About 10 years ago, I was a windsurfer. I windsurfed on the Columbia River from 1980 to 1996. But in 1986, I asked a question, what's in the river? And I was in the international trade marketing business. I wasn't, quote, an environmental activist. I wasn't an anti-nuker. I wasn't anything. I was just a guy in business. I asked a question and found out that nobody out there was really looking at the river. So I started asking questions, I started finding out problems, and then I found out about Hanford. And look where I am 10 years from now. I'm doing Hanford full time. I do Hanford because of one reason. The river out there is a part of me. When I'd windsurf on that river, it'd talk to me. When I sat down alongside the beach with a bunch of elders, Native American elders, 2 of them were chiefs, and they told me stories about the river, and they told me what the fish used to look like when they were young kids and how many fish there were. And they told me what the fish look like today as far as looking at their health. And you know, I came from a business world where you observe something, you make a conclusion, and you move on. But when I started working at Hanford, I realized that's not how the world works. The world at Hanford is, well, we have to prove it, and you have to prove it beyond some shadow of a doubt, or it's your argument against my argument against your argument, and nobody ever wants to get anything solved. They don't look at the big pictures. So I was going to talk really about the CRCIA, but Tom Woods, who's not in the room right now, who just retired, was the chair of the CRCIA, and Leno Nicolai in the back of the room also worked on CRCIA. I'll talk about that briefly at the end to let you know what we have to do. But right now I want to tell you a little story that I kind of wrote up. I had the opportunity last week to go to a radiation conference in New York, and they brought in the top radiation experts from around the world. And I've been into human health things since 1974 when I started working with a Chinese doctor, and what I learned from a Chinese doctor was what I wish the nuke industry would learn, and what I wish the scientists out here would learn, and what I wish the Western doctors would learn. That there are things that happen in your body that are very subtle changes that are disease that our Western doctors don't notice, that they notice, the Chinese doctors. They understand when there's a delicate balance that's being out of balance, and they realize that cancer will be an endpoint. But they go out there and they try to prevent it. Well, when I started looking at radiation in human health, I realized there was something totally missing. Just like our medicine. It's crisis medicine. It's a medicine where you go in, if you got something, a bump in, they cut it off, they say, oops, it's gone, but they don't ask the question, how did it get there? Well, they do the same thing with radiation and protection. They use cancer as an endpoint. Excuse me, before you ever developed cancer, your body was way out of whack. And if we're going to use cancer as an endpoint for a radiation health standard and keep it that, we might as well go home. Because we're going to kill off all the future generations because of our toxic pollutants, and it's not just Hanford. So I'm going to start talking about Hanford now. I just had to touch in with that because we just left off on this human health thing. At this conference, they concluded, beyond any shadow of a doubt, don't use cancer as an endpoint. Use the subtle biological changes that have been observed in science for numerous years, 20, 30 years. Chromosomal damage, cellular changes, cellular abnormalities. They know it, they've known it. And as Jim Thomas said, the Department of Energy has known this since the 40s when their documents said we've got to watch out for genetic defects. In fact, in 1954, there was a document written, and it said that at that point in time, they were releasing about 8,000 curies of radiation to the river in the river today, 1954. And that by 1958, they would be releasing tenfold. What's that, 80,000 curies of radiation a day? In that same document, they said, you know what they should do? They should shut the river down to all commercial uses, to all recreational uses. And at the very bottom there was this group called the Northwest Advisory Council. And you know who that was? That was representatives from the state of Washington, state of Oregon, the universities, the health departments, the Atomic Energy Commission, the General Electric Company. And they said, because it would be such a bad publicity problem, we advised against it. They knew, they know, and as long as we keep arguing about cancer as an endpoint, we'll never change this culture. We've got to change them. It's talking about sensitivity. For the last 50 years, this country was caught up in the Cold War, where the military-industrial complex was the fuel for this country, and the fear of Russia and communism was the big threat. And what did we do? We went out on a path to build weapons upon weapons upon weapons. What we built, how many? Who knows? Somebody said 25,000. Some people said between Russia and them it was like 70,000 thermonuclear warheads. We built a ton. During this Cold War era, secrecy was a way of life, and running back and forth throughout the secret doors, never letting anyone know the whole story. The U.S. DOE complex is part of this legacy, and it's part of this legacy today. It hasn't changed. We talked about, Lloyd Marbett said, well, what about throwing the Department of Energy out? Okay, we've got one opportunity, and it's coming up, and I'll talk to you about it in a minute. Unfortunately, the U.S. DOE secrecy behind closed doors is still a part of daily operations. They deny the risks that Hanford truly poses to the citizens of the Northwest. They still do not want the public to know just how bad Hanford is contaminated. They have lied to all of those who have been exposed to Hanford's deadly toxic emissions that's spewed through our atmosphere, that have flowed down the Columbia River to the mouth and then up and down the Washington and Oregon coast, never once telling the public about these deadly risks. For the last 50 years, they have used Mother Earth as their garbage pit, thinking that they could just dispose of their waste and it would just go away. They could just dispose of the people and they would just go away. Hey, let's hang these lawsuits out for a little while longer. So all the downwinders who are the parents that are fighting right now, they die off. Their kids might not have the energy because they're sick and they won't fight and they'll go away too. Disposable society, just throw your stuff in the ground. USDA finally gave in, and then when the public demanded that USDA analyze the VADOS zone under the 177 level waste tanks, they drug their feet. When we first started this back in 1989, in 1989, when the TriParty Agreement was signed, we kept asking questions like, well, how bad's the ground contaminated? We heard there was 444 billion gallons of radioactive waste dumped into the ground. Well, where's that stuff moving to? And what are you going to do about the VADOS zone? And what are you going to do about all these other tanks out here? And they kept telling us, oh, we're going to do one thing here, we're going to do one thing here. They were focusing on tanks, they were forgetting about the river. And then finally, because everybody around started saying, hey, what are we going to do about the river? They finally changed their focus and said, well, let's go dig up dirt along the river and tell them we're getting it clean. Well, how are we getting it clean? How are we having protective standards if they believe that cancer is the end point? Excuse me, we have to start looking at the biological changes, the subtle cellular changes that are going on. We have to start looking at the fish and the ecosystem. They look at fish and they use LOLs, lowest observable levels, like when the fish dies and floats to the top of the tank, they go, oops, that's toxic enough. Excuse me, those fish are being hurt immediately as soon as they're being exposed, because you know what it does? It goes into their cellular structure and it starts changing the cells. It starts breaking down the immune system of the fish. It starts changing the way the fish reproduce. Columbia River United just commissioned a little small study to look at the sturgeon in the lower Columbia River. They found plutonium 139, or 239 and 240 in them. They found strontium in them. They found all sorts of other heavy metals and pesticides in them. But you know what they found? Out of 300 fish, they found of those 300 sturgeon, less than 90% of them had male-female organs that could reproduce. Ron Wyden stood up here and said we have to look about, protecting the future and pollutants. Excuse me, folks, that clock has passed. We have to start acting rapidly because the ecosystem in the Columbia River is dying. Like the people who have been exposed to it have died and are dying. This is real. We talked about waste tanks. They finally gave in and they said, we'll commission a study and we'll go out there and prove, this is how they do their science, we'll prove that the waste didn't go down. It went up, I guess. Gravity sucks, doesn't go down, it's just going to go up. So they commissioned this group over here to go over and take some pictures of it. Gamma spectral logging. What'd they find? Hey, to me it was like a no-brainer. They've got these 177 tanks, all high level, 70 of them which they admitted leaked. And let me ask you a question, folks. How many people think that the waste would have just stayed 10 feet underneath the tanks in 50 years? Their science thought that. That's how they do business out there. Denial, denial, denial. And it's not a river called the Nile, it's the Columbia River, and they don't want to talk about impacts. So they looked at this and they told us, I'll use a name, Mike Thompson. Oh, you know what we had? We had surface contamination here. He works for the Department of Energy. We had surface contamination, lots of flooding. And then we said, oh, you did? Well, hey, do me a favor. Tell us how bad this flood was, would you? Because we need to reanalyze all the waste out here because you had a lot of water up here. And you're telling us it's a dry, arid climate. So that argument went away. They finally gave in. They finally conceded, yeah, the tank waste did leak and it did hit the groundwater and it is going into the Columbia River. And folks, it's been going into the Columbia River for a long time. The tanks have hit groundwater a long time ago. And I don't necessarily have to wait for their science to get to that point to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that we've got a ticking time bomb up there. About 3 years ago, actually about 5, 6 years ago, because everybody was screaming about protecting the Columbia River, a bunch of people kept pushing the Department of Energy to do a look at the river, kind of an assessment of the Columbia River. What's going on current day? Even though all the reports would say, oh, it's fine, don't worry, there's no problems, don't worry. We'd seen risk assessments and their numbers were bogus. People would say, this isn't valid science, it's garbage in, garbage out. They had expert panels, they had peer review panels, they had technical experts, they had all their people, just like Leonard Schrader was talking about, that they use in court, and they all showed us there was no problem. But when you really look closely at how they do their science, there's a problem, big problem. It's called a huge bias. And the bias is built on the fact that this agency is still living in the Cold War, that secrecy is still alive and well, and that the President of the United States, President Clinton, commissioned a report for every executive office to do, an agency to do, to find out what their liabilities were, and this was in 1994, how much money they owed for liabilities. Well, why did they do that effort? They did it simply because they don't want to pay anybody for any liability. So their science protects them. Their courts protect them. Unfortunately for us, we live downstream. And these people, unless they change, are not going to clean up Hanford, are not going to protect future generations, and are going to continue the environmental degradation and human health deaths that they're causing forever. And it's not just Hanford, but right now we're focusing on Hanford. This is a global picture about the river. So we collectively, these people got together and said, look, we don't really think that you're doing it right, and we've got a problem the way you look at science at Hanford, the way you do risk assessments to see if there's an impact to the river, or the way you do a performance assessment to see if a tank's going to leak or it'll explode. We've had experts always showing that, look at the biases in here. So we formed an organization, this next slide. It was a group of people that came together, and it's called the Comprehensive Columbia River Impact Assessment Team, and that's what Tom Woods spoke eloquently about today, about a concept about what's going on. This team was formed, and look, if you can notice who's on it, the Confederated Tribes, the Nez Perce, the Yakima, the state of Oregon. I was a representative of the Hanford Advisory Board, U.S. Department of Energy, the EPA, state of Washington, and the Hanford contractors. We even had Battelle in there working with us. And I'll tell you what, I have been an arch critic of Battelle for a long time. I still am, but there's some good scientists in there. There's good people at Hanford that can do good work. The problem is the politics and the denial. It's the upper level management that's the problem. It's not the workers. They could do the work if you give them the power and you give them the free reins to do the work. This group spent 2.5 years. First 6 or 7 months, it was chaos. We listed all sorts of problems that we found with all the things that they had done out there, and we put laundry lists all up along the board to find out all the issues that were out there that were sensitive to us. And I remember talking one time in a presentation, and I said, you know what CRCIA is? The Comprehensive Columbia River Impact Assessment? What it is it's a tool that with the help of Lino and the Yakima Nation and Tom Woods and the other people that worked on this, we created a tool, a blueprint, a roadmap that takes these people out there that have been controlled, that didn't have the reins to ask the right questions in their scientific analysis, and now we've given them a tool that allows them to understand our sensitivity. Our sensitivity about cellular changes, about the chromosomal damage, about reproduction disorders, about doing valid science out there that makes sense. And as Ron Wyden stood up, he says, they've got one more chance, one last chance to do this groundwater vadose program right. Well, unfortunately today, the Department of Energy isn't here, so we'll just send a tape off to them and hopefully they'll listen to all this that happened. But the groundwater vadose program, as they've defined right now, is still myopic. It only wants to look at little things. What we want to look at the Comprehensive Columbia River Impact Assessment is, you can put the next one up, is we want to look at everything on the site. We want to look at where all the wastes are. And let's say one example down in the 100 areas there, they say there was only 50 curies of radiation. But Jim Thomas does some research, independent, people do research, and we find in that one little area there, there's 5,000 curies. In another area, we find there's 1 million curies instead of 2,000 curies. We don't believe, I don't believe, and I'm speaking for myself now, I don't believe what they've told us out there is even part of the story about how contaminated it is. I think the source terms out there are much worse than everybody could ever imagine. I think the numbers are much worse. I think they're still hiding. But what we need to do is we need to help the Department of Energy realize, and this is what the Comprehensive Columbia River Impact Assessment does, is it makes them realize that it's okay to talk about what's there. That's okay, because it's been there for a long time. There's no blame for that. But what we want to know is we want to see the facts, we want to see the documents, we want to understand the source terms, we want to look at all the cumulative wastes, and then we want to assess those of how long they're going to stay there, and if they aren't going to stay there, what potential impact they're going to have tomorrow, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 1 million years, not that far out, 1,000 years, as far out as we could calculate. What do we do when we get that? We're going to have the ability to guide the Department of Energy down a road that gives us the sensitivity to let them know it's okay to talk about it. We're going to guide them down the road that lets them understand that they need to look at the cumulative impacts and all the potential problems that are out there. So when they start doing their cleanup, as they're kind of half-heartedly doing now, they're going to be more in line with really doing cleanup that makes sense, that protects future generations. If we don't get this, if the Comprehensive Columbia River Impact Assessment, or what we're calling now the Hanford Regional Impact Assessment, if we are not successful in having the Department of Energy with the CRCIA team do this process, then I will have to say that it's time in the next 2 years to get rid of the Department of Energy. Because we have to have cleanup that protects us. And they don't have us in their screen. They don't care because their sensitivity isn't there. So you all need to stay involved with Hanford. Really, really, really strong with Hanford because they want to start up weapons production for tritium. They want to get away from this cleanup mission because it's a dirty little game. And we can't do it without you. We need to keep the pressure up. But the Comprehensive Columbia River Impact Assessment team needs to be the independent management team of this process. We can't have DOE running it and putting in their garbage and doing the garbage science that they usually do. You have to have the independence, and that's what the CRCIA is about. In the back of the room, there's letters of support, and please keep plugged in with Hanford because we've got a battle over the next 2 to 3 years for cleanup, for successful guiding the DOE, and if they don't do it, let's just replace them. Thank you.
I'm Susan Gordon. I'm the director of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, which is a national environmental network that connects the grassroots groups that are located adjacent to the Department of Energy nuclear weapons complex facilities. So Government Accountability Project, Hanford Education Action League, Heart of America Northwest are members of my national network, and we represent folks like you that are at all of the other DOE facility sites. And as horrible as the stories are at Hanford, they're equally bad every place else across this country. So I just want you to remember that as you're working on your work, that you're not alone, that people are out there doing the same kinds of struggles, the same kinds of battles. And it's important for us to remember that when we're working towards solutions too, that solutions that involve transferring waste to Hanford from some other site in the complex, that's not a solution that's acceptable in my network. We're very careful about the not in my backyard syndrome and want to look at it very much in the big picture about finding real solutions. I just have to say one thing about the new Secretary Richardson. He has been advocating for a cleanup summit. That's something that he has put out. We just got word from our friends at Rocky Flats that Jim Owendoff, who's the head of the Environmental Management Program, was at Rocky Flats at a citizen meeting on, well, it probably wasn't a citizen meeting, it was probably their advisory board meeting on Thursday. And Owendoff said that what the cleanup summit is going to be is a governor's conference. This is not a cleanup summit in the definition that we're interested in. So my organization, ANA, is already sending a letter into Richardson on Monday saying that that's not acceptable, that tribes, community groups, environmentalists all have to be involved in whatever a cleanup summit is. So that's a piece that we're working on. And also, I'll do my plug. Over on the table, we have copies of a 4-part cleanup series that we did this year. The last part in particular has, I think, 59 criteria of what we think should be involved in a credible cleanup plan. So you might want to take a look at that. So now I get to to introduce the folks in the panel. This is sort of the activist moment of what are the next steps. We're going to try to keep our presentation short so we have a lot of time for you all to give us some feedback and to add your thoughts into what the next steps are for this process. So first I'd like to introduce Merilyn Reeves. Merilyn has been an activist with the League of Women Voters for many years and currently serves as the chair of the Hanford Advisory Board, a significant responsibility and one that we appreciate her doing for us. Merilyn?
I think the one thing you've learned in the 2 days that you've been meeting is DOE needs all the advice that it can get. And one of the ways, of course, that any government agency attempts to reach out is to then begin to seek out a citizen advisory group. In 1993, the Hanford Advisory Board was formed, and many believed it was formed in a way so it would fail. 5 years later, it has not failed. 5 years later, it does still remain a collective forum for the different interest groups to come together, and the most interesting thing about it is where they agree. Now, right now, I think what I would like to very quickly say to you is, where do you go from here? And I would like to suggest to you that since DOE and this nation needs all the advice that it can possibly get, that you must send a very strong message to your members of Congress that the state of Oregon must have adequate resources to be able to do the job of monitoring what happens there. That the tribal nations must have adequate resources to be able to do the very effective job that they have done over the years of monitoring what happens there. That advisory groups like the Hanford Advisory Boards and public interest groups receive the funding they need and deserve to be able to help us get on with this whole program. And like the school board, when they have their budget problems and they say, you know, folks, we don't have enough money now, so what we're going to do is cut the football team. Right now, these groups are below the line because, you know, those aren't cleanup. Well, cleanup or stabilization is not going to occur unless we have some meeting of the minds, and that's what gives it to us. I would like to have you, as your eyes glaze over in technicalities, come away with just 2 or 3 key things. Watch the words you use when you try to go out there and somebody say, you mean you spent 2 whole days talking about Hanford? That's a mess up there. What are they doing? And I think most of you would take a big gulp and say, where would I start to explain it? I do not like the words cleanup. I think cleanup is a misnomer. I think the best that we can possibly do in the near term is to stabilize those wastes, put them out of harm's way for the workers, for the public, for the environment. That is a very important thing to do. We're hearing DOE use words now about closure. Oh, they would love to do closure. Closure, they've got a whole new plan out, you know. Paths to closure. Closure. No, no, no. There's not ever going to be any closure for materials that have a half-life of 10,000 years, etc., and with the knowledge base that they have. Then we have this pet phrase that's coming out called integration. Well, come on. You know what integration is? It's the shell game. We take the waste from Ohio and we move some of those wastes, not all of them, but some of them, to Nevada, and then we can forget about them, see? But 60% of the wastes are still there in Ohio. Oh, don't worry about those. You know, I'm not sure what we're going to do with them. You know what wastes they're talking about? Only those wastes that end up being regulated through the regulatory agency roles of RCRA and CERCLA. That's really what they're talking about with this integration. It's not a cost saving. There is no compelling reason to move waste from one part of the country to another part of the country. But the time you stabilize the waste well enough to put them on a truck or put them on a train to take them through all this intermediate points, then you have to ask, well, wait a minute. If it's safe enough to haul it, why isn't it safe enough to isolate it and leave it where it is? Watch the language carefully. Watch the words. Use words like stabilize, because in the near term, that's about all we're going to get. Remember, we have three main problems at Hanford. We must remove the spent fuel rods away from the Columbia River into an interim storage. We must take care and stabilize those tank materials. We have no treatment. We've got to do something with the material. People say, oh, just put grout in them. No, 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 no. And finally, we have complexes like the plutonium finishing plant, a huge complex, which is a threat to the workers who have to go in there every day, and this needs to be stabilized. So watch your words. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Casey, and I think you all know who Casey is by this point, so come on.
I've got a long speech written here for you. We've heard a lot today, but I want to be short so that you all can have a chance to communicate and try to get engaged in where the future is after we leave here today. What I did want to share with you, though, is I have been fired not once but twice. I've been run all over the country and all those kinds of things, and people ask me, why is it that I continue with this battle? And one answer is that I'm actually insane, and that may be the reality. The other answer is, if people like me leave, who does it leave it to? And that comes to the root cause of our problem. I'm going to just tell you real shortly what my beliefs are. We've all heard, I don't think there's anybody here in this room that's going to stand up and say, no, there's really not an environmental crisis at hand. What we really have is we have a program that is leaderless, is a program that has no vision, all of which I see this room full of. I see leaders, I see people with vision, conviction, courage, all of which is missing in the Department of Energy. And it is incumbent upon us to have the courage to do what must be done to change that. And I do not know the answers, or I would have already done it. If lighting my hair on fire would work, I would do it in a second. Okay? I'm sure that Russell, Jim, and I would do it. If it would pay off, we'd do it. But what I ask you is, where are we going to go from here? And I can tell you that who I am is a possibility, positive empowerment for all people. And I ask you, will you continue the fight with me? Thank you.
Paige Levin is a field organizer with Heart of America Northwest, and she's been working with them for 2.5 years, and she's got some update on legislation for us to be paying attention to and some other direct things for us to be involved in.
Hello, my name is Paige Levin, and I'm with Heart of America Northwest, and we are a citizen watchdog group that works on the cleanup of the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, and this year we're celebrating our 10th anniversary. You guys have heard a lot from our executive director throughout the past couple of days, Jerry Paulette, who's among the leaders working on the fight to continue the cleanup, or stabilization, I guess Merilyn would prefer I say, of the cleanup of the Hanford site. And I, originally wanted to come up here and give you guys a couple minutes of inspiring words of why it's so important that you all get involved with the cleanup of Hanford Nuclear Reservation. But over the past 2 days, you've heard from so many people, ranging from Helen Caldicott to Casey Ruud, and tons of people in between, who have really done such an excellent job of laying out what the problems are that we're facing, what the obstacles are that we need to overcome, that I really don't feel that if you all are not convinced at this point that you need to be involved in making sure that doing everything you can to make sure that this fight to continue for the cleanup of Hanford, if you're not convinced by now you need to be involved, then I don't think that I can do it in a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to go on the assumption that you guys are all here ready and willing and dedicated to preserving and continuing the efforts that we need to take to make sure that Hanford does move towards cleanup. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts. The Heart of America Northwest is part of a group of public interest organizations, the Hanford Public Interest Network, that work together and come together to try to make efficient campaigns to work on particular issues around Hanford, to fight to do things that we consider sort of the priorities in the cleanup of Hanford. And we put together a little sheet that I think has just recently been passed out to you. Talks about getting involved, and this talks about some of the nuts and bolts of the things that you all can do to work on the cleanup of Hanford. And I'm not going to go through them too thoroughly because I don't want to spend all my time up here talking. We want to hear about ideas from you. Some of the priorities that we decided on include the campaign to stop the fast flux test facility, which is right now, the Department of Energy is considering restarting a nuclear reactor to produce tritium for nuclear bombs at Hanford. You cannot possibly consider talking about the future of Hanford or the cleanup of Hanford without taking realistic ideas and concerns about what restarting a reactor at Hanford would do. It would absolutely devastate the potential for cleanup at Hanford. So we definitely consider it a priority, and there's many ways for you to get involved. We've laid out some of those ideas, including the very first thing being taking home the petitions that are being handed out right now, getting them signed, talking to your neighbors, getting your neighbors to sign them and return them to us. Another issue that we've prioritized is the cleanup of the groundwater and vadosone. Of course, again, I don't think I need to tell you guys how important this is. I think that's been, you probably all are thoroughly convinced. So we've laid out just some real basic ideas of things that you can do right off the bat and you can do when you leave to continue to make sure that that happens. And those include signing or writing a letter similar to the CRCIA support letter that Greg DeBruler has out on a number of the tables outside. Signing up, letting us know you want to work on this. We'll get resolutions that you can take to your community organizations, get them passed to let our leaders know that this is a priority. Again, what Merilyn talked about, the tank waste, stabilizing those tanks is an absolute priority. I don't think I need to reiterate why, but I will say that we've got we're going to have an opportunity for public involvement on these issues, and it is absolutely vital that people like you and your neighbors and the people and citizens of the Northwest come out and demand that the DOE uses the most efficient, safest, most thorough means to get those tanks stabilized, and we're going to need you all to get your neighbors out to these hearings. These are just a couple ideas of some of the most basic grassroots kinds of things that we can do. And these are just some of the starting points for where your activism can make a difference. We want to take the rest of this time, as soon as Paige is done here, encouraging you, please give us your ideas. We want to hear your input. Do these priorities match yours? Do you think we should all be working on other things also, as well? For example, replacing the Department of Energy, I'm hearing very often. It seems to be a theme of this conference. Please talk to us and tell us what your ideas are, because together we can work and we can make this happen. So I'm just going to close with saying that I know that right now each and every one of you probably feels a real urgency and understands the importance of getting involved and making a difference. I want you to take just a second to think about how that feels. Because when you leave here, when you go home and you start getting caught up in your daily routine, it's going to be really, really important that you can refer back to this feeling, back to this urgency. Because the problems at Hanford are not going to dissipate when we leave this room. We cannot let our commitment to the urgency of making sure that cleanup happens dissipate when we leave this room. Thank you.
One of the great things for me about being here today is seeing all of my old-time fellow activists from the state of Oregon, anti-nuclear activists specifically, Lloyd, Lynn Sims, Chuck Johnson, I think, walked in the room, folks that have been at this for a long time. And among that list is Paige Knight, whose floor I've slept on, whose hearings I've been to. Paige is the founder of Hanford Watch and is on the Hanford Education Action League board. Paige.
Thanks. Hanford Watch has been around for almost 8 years now. I think it's almost anniversary time. And I have to ask myself every once in a while, have we made a difference? And yesterday, when I was listening to this new undersecretary, or second secretary, or whatever his number is, I had a moment of hopelessness. Now, I don't let those moments last very long, or I would walk out on this instantly. And I haven't been able to walk out for the 8 years, and I feel like I'm probably committed for the rest of my life. And I don't, that means a lot of things to me. I'm also a teacher. I teach at an alternative high school here in town, and yesterday 10 of my kids chose to come with me to hear Helen Caldecott and a few other people, and they were very interested and very curious. And one of my missions personally, and I think it's the mission of all of our groups really at heart, whether we state it or not, is we have got to pass on the caring and the knowledge to younger generations, because we're all going to be dead in 40 or 50 years or whatever it is. We have to pass the message on. We have to pass the heart on. We have to give people enough knowledge to get involved. One of the things that I tell my class all the time when I hear whining and griping and, it's so boring, which is their most favorite phrase, is one person doing one thing makes an incredible difference. And that's how I feel about what I've done. That's how I feel about what everybody in this room and all of the people who aren't in this room that worked before me have done. Each one of us has made a little difference. Now, we don't see huge changes at Hanford, but I think that we have at least become a force to be reckoned with on some level. We're not where we want to be there yet. Some of the types of things that groups like ours have done, and I do want to mention that on this list of the HPIN groups, the Hanford Public Interest Network, one group is missing accidentally, and that's HEAL, which is the Hanford Education Action League out of Spokane, who did some of the original FOIA-ing of documents and got a lot of things going in terms of opening up the tremendous lies that we were told by Hanford people. All of us do a variety of things. We all try to work together wherever we can. Sometimes people ask me, well, why is there more than one group in Portland? Why are there why are there so many groups working on Hanford? And my basic answer is, there's too much for even all of us to do. So we each sort of pick our area and we work together where we can. And I suggest that all of you, and I hope that you've already done this, go around to the tables, pick up brochures, see what we each do, give us a call, interview us to find out if you mesh with us, and get involved. And by that, I don't mean, spend the rest of your life doing this. I'm talking about one simple action, which might be making a phone call to Senator Wyden to follow up on some of the commitments he made today, making a phone call to some of your local people or the Office of Energy to get information, writing a letter, a handwritten letter, I have to tell you, is the most powerful thing any of your legislators can get. So we've all worked on things like that. All of our groups call and send out emails and flyers, etc., to get people to come out to hearings. Because if we have a hearing on an important issue and 4 people show up, it doesn't help us at all. At the FFTF hearings that we had in January and February, it's the biggest hearing turnout I have ever seen in my 8 years at Hanford, and I had heard about hearings in the past, and I had never heard about a hearing with this many people. We had close to 400 people that night. And it was astounding. The room was packed. The Oregonian reported that we had 200 people, which sort of figures, But we had nearly 400 people there that night. And people were eloquent, and people gave of their time and stayed till 1 o'clock in the morning making their comments. Those are important. And they at least give us clout, if we don't get our way on FFTF, to go back and probably get a lot of people to march up to Hanford if that's what it's going to take. And I suspect that in years to come, we're going to have to march on Hanford. I think that's where we're headed, frankly, because we have hit the brick wall of intense stubbornness in the people who oversee the DOE. We have a management problem, and that's to put it mildly. So I want to iterate, one person makes a difference. There are, I think, a lot of people here today that work on other issues, fish issues, forest issues, what have you. I think that Hanford is the underlying current that is central to many of those issues. And I know that we have to work together. If people want me to get involved in forest issues, I have a little problem there because I could hardly handle Hanford issues. But we have to find out the places where we can connect. And if it means that I can get 10 forest people to come to an FFTF hearing, and then I go to one really important hearing that they have and bring my cronies with me, then we've got some power building, and that's what it is going to take. And everybody has been saying this today. So I encourage you to get the brochures from the various groups and find a little way, even a little way, to get involved. If that's donating your artwork, for somebody's brochure. That's what has happened with our group lately. We've had people donate time to create a web page. We've had people donate time to do brochures and design logos. And those are very important things. They're little, but they're important. And then that person can go on with their life and hook back in and say, what can I do now? I have a little more time. So that's what it's going to take here, and I just encourage all of you to do it. We are the only ones who are going to make a difference. We cannot rely on politicians. We cannot rely on the present form of DOE management. We have got to do it, and it takes loud, sometimes nasty voices to do that. And I'm willing to use my nasty voice, if you were around yesterday, when I need to. And we need to do that, Greg. Yeah. So with that, I just want to, give you that encouragement. And then I want to close with something that is really inspiring to me. And it's not just about Hanford, but it's about everything, and it includes Hanford. And I have to tell you, I feel like I'm taking a privilege that maybe I don't have permission to take. But one of the organizers of this conference sent me this book as a thank you for some of the things that I'd done, because she also knew I was going to use it in my poetry class and my civics class at school. And I found this incredible poem by Sherman Alexie, who, by the way, did this great film called Smoke Signals. And this poem brought out the most interesting discussion in my environmental civics class. And these kids are not sophisticated, but they started asking a ton of questions, and they're still thinking, and they thought more yesterday after being here and hearing some of the speakers. So this is a poem by Sherman Alexie. It's called The Powwow at the End of the World. And I hope I don't cry. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after an Indian woman puts her shoulder to the Grand Coulee Dam and topples it. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters burst each successive dam downriver from the Grand Coulee. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters find their way to the mouth of the Columbia River as it enters the Pacific and causes all of it to rise. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the first drop of floodwater is swallowed by that salmon waiting in the Pacific. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims upstream through the mouth of the Columbia and then past the flooded cities, broken dams, and abandoned reactors at Hanford. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims through the mouth of the Spokane River as it meets the Columbia, then upstream, until it arrives in the shallows of a secret bay on the reservation where I wait alone. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon leaps into the night air above the water, throws a lightning bolt at the brush near my feet, and starts the fire which will lead all of the lost Indians home. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after we Indians have gathered around the fire with that salmon, who has 3 stories it must tell before sunrise. One story will teach us how to pray. Another story will make us laugh for hours. And the 3rd story will give us reason to dance. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, when I am dancing with my tribe during the powwow at the end of the world. Thank you. And I want to end too with, there's a little map that we have here, and there are a few maps of this around the room. We're having a gathering after this meeting is over at a place called R.P. Murray's Pub in the Academy domed building. And what you do is you leave here, go down Columbia River when you leave the Doubletree, and that's heading north. You turn right on Evergreen, and then you just head a couple blocks over to R.P. Murray's in the big domed building called the Academy. So if you need those directions, they're here. And it's a place where after this discussion, people can sit and talk more and share ideas and you know, just work on sort of that collective feeling, that spirit and that heart that Tom Woods told us today that Hanford is lacking, that we need to bring to it. Thanks.
Okay, so do you want to set the microphones up? And we're going to take comments and questions and suggestions and ideas from you all out there. I think the mics actually need to go out into the audience. Okay. Judith.
This one?
Technical difficulties here. We'll take care of them in a moment. Is somebody taking notes of these comments, by the way? Okay. You want to come up here?
Really quick, while they're trying to get that done, Helen Caldecott had asked to pass on a couple things that action items that she would have liked to have mentioned, and she didn't get a chance to mention yesterday. So I just want to share those with you. There's a couple of bills that are going to be coming up in the House that she would love to see us all ask our representatives to support. The first one is House Bill 307 by Ed Markey, and that is aimed at cutting funding for the stockpiled stewardship program, which is right now at $4.5 billion. And wouldn't it be nice if some of that money could be freed up for cleanup? And the other one is HB 479 by Representative Woosley, and that is calling for an ending on nuclear weapons production. So please ask your representatives to support those. And please, the action sheets that I pointed out, please fill out the bottom, and there's a box at one of the tables back there and at the registration table, so turn those in.
Can you give those numbers again, Paige?
HB 307, and H is the stockpile stewardship one, and HB 479.
Stockpile stewardship. The stockpile stewardship program is the DOE's latest version of nuclear weapons forever. It is the upgrade of the nuclear weapons labs. It's for continued production and design of nuclear weapons. The cleanup budget's being cut and the money's going into stockpile stewardship. It's the National Ignition Facility. It's, I can't even say all the whole words. I know the acronyms DART, which is the dual axis hydro, somebody help me, RT, I don't know. But there's a whole series of new weapons lab design work that's going on, including on college campuses where a lot of these projects are being developed. If you're interested in college campus organizing or the ASCII program, which is the Accelerated Supercomputer, help me, Judith, ASCII. Yeah, National Resources Defense Council has put together an excellent book that documents the college campuses that are involved in nuclear weapons design work. Judith, is the mic on?
I think it is now, and forgive me, audience, for my back to you, I guess. One more thing I did want to mention, please. Clear at the base of our problem is the first section of the Atomic Energy Act, and we tend to ignore it. It says, and this is almost a direct quote, it says, Congress finds there's some good reasons for having nuclear energy, using nuclear energy. And then this is what it says. It shall be the policy of the United States that the development, use, and control of atomic energy shall be directed to the maximum extent for the general welfare, only that's not defined, subject at all times to the maximum contribution to the common defense and security. And then it goes on to talk about privatization and so on and so on. But the important point is that there isn't a single word in that statement of national nuclear energy policy about protecting health or the environment. And I think it's high time it got changed after all these decades. And I'd like us somehow to make people aware of that fact and begin to work on it. Thanks.
Thank you. Other activist ideas out there?
Oh, I'm an activist. I'm great. Gay Oglesby again. There's something that's always overlooked here and always kind of amazes me. Where I work, there's a byproduct there in capsules, stored in capsules, that represents the greatest amount of dose budget inventory on this continent. And the caretakers are very reckless. Managers have to ask permission before they can come on shift into their domain because they're sleeping and knitting and doing their parties and things like that. I work there. It's a very dangerous situation. There's filters outside a B plant that can't even be removed that are just so high. I don't have my records in front of me, so I'm not going to quote any figures. But the Defense Nuclear Safety Board knows how dangerous that place is, and they put it out on the website all the time. People can read it. I never hear anybody talking about this because there is hydrogen buildup there because of the decay. So I'm just reminding people that there is another dose budget inventory there. It's very dangerous to people. You'd live 5 days if one capsule happened to be critical. So it already polluted Decatur, Georgia, and the same judge that Leonard Schrader is talking about dismissed that case too.
Wow.
So he's linked to a lot of problems, this McDonald person. And that contaminated the drinking water also and the arena around there because of the WESF capsule that was moved from there to Decatur ruptured, and somebody was ratcheting it, and it got a hole in it, and it contaminated the pool cell. So that's already happened, and people sued, and he dismissed the case. So you can see what his pattern is.
Yep.
He doesn't want anybody to know. So I just want everybody to know about that little problem we have at WESF right now, too. And they're trying to decouple it from B plant, which they turned out the lights, they said, but they're going to do something else with that plant, I can guarantee it.
Yeah. And
And it's very dangerous, very, very dangerous place. Okay, thank you.
thank you. Tom.
I have an action item. Our good friends at the National Association of Radiation Survivors has been tracking and monitoring for the rest of us kind of the antics and behavior of some of the scientific oversight bodies and hospitals and whatnot who are commissioned to do low-level radiation health cover-ups. And I've got a letter here that they wanted me to share with the rest of you to the Hutchinson, or the National Center for Environmental Health. I'll read it very quickly, and anyone who wants to see this letter and take notes off it or whatever, please see me. It's very short. And it says, Dear Mr. Jackson, the National Association of Radiation Survivors represents the interests of more than 11,000 persons exposed to radiation. Members include downwinders, veterans, miners, millers, and victims of Cold War experimentation. A substantial segment of our membership are persons exposed at Hanford. This organization and its members have dealt with the federal agencies and private concerns responsible for the exposures for over 17 years. We have been met by delay, disinterest, and deliberate obfuscation. Your agency is one of the few to show a genuine concern for those affected by fallout, hot particles, accidents, and the like. We now call on you to release the draft final report of the Hanford Thyroid Disease Study. We realize that the draft may be revised, but request you adhere to the precedent set by the openness which characterized the development of HEDR, TSB and HEDR, which is Hanford Environmental Dose Reconstruction Project, reports and the release of the draft report on Fernall. Members of the medical community and the public need this study in order to make decisions which may well preserve the health of American citizens. And what he's referring to is that the Hanford Thyroid Disease Study has been completed. The Hutchinson Institute has been sitting on the study, has actually engaged PR firms to engage in spin doctoring so that they can best present it to the public on perhaps a Friday or a Saturday afternoon in a one-paragraph press release that doesn't say anything, so they can say they did announce it. We can't, of course, let that happen, and Cooper Brown and others are urging that the public go ahead and put some pressure on some of the agencies that we know that they've got this study done, and please release it and start telling us what's going on. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right to the Hutchinson or?
To Jackson, who's, yeah.
I've got a copy of the letter here. The letter is addressed, in this case, to Mr. Richard J. Jackson, who's the director of the National Center for Environmental Health.
Yeah. Okay, while we're doing that, I've got a fax that I just got, too, from the same people, Wally Cummins and
Cooper Brown.
And Cooper Brown. They enclosed language of a conference committee of Congress yesterday, the one that Karen Dorn-Steele reported on in the article that's been circulated around here. Reading the facts I just got, as my colleague, the deputy director at ATSDR said, it is hard-hearted. It is an outrage. The rumor is they lied to Senator Murray about its being a sure thing. Can the meeting, us, pass a strongly worded resolution, she, the deputy director at ATSDR, and I don't know whether it's Wally or Cooper, can take to the Hill next week, and Karen will have an article on this, and it should follow up on that.
So I'm not clear as to, this is about the lack of money for the Hanford
Yeah.
study?
They cut the funds, and they seek to not have the health HHIN study. Well,
Okay.
That's the outrage of the week.
Right.
It's not the health, it's separate from the Hanford thyroid disease study. I want to be clear about that.
Okay. Okay, so who's willing to write up this resolution here?
You do a great job. Just did it.
Okay, is that all right with folks? We'll write up something and they'll be able to use it on the Hill, that folks here.
For people's signatures.
You want to pass this? Okay, we could do that. Somebody get a sheet and pass it around, and we'll put your names on this, and be sure to spell your name clearly for those of us who can't read your handwriting. And I don't know what your name is?
Lynn Porter, Hanford Watch. I don't think I can absorb even one more sentence of information. My brain is dead. But I want to express my appreciation to the people who organized this conference. I do feel like I got a lot out of it. I'd like to see some sort of follow-up where we get Hanford activists together in a room somewhere and talk about strategy, something a lot more interactive than we were able to do here. And not just the leaders. I know the leaders of these groups stay in contact through the Hanford Advisory Board and so on, but most of us in Portland are very much out of the loop. And I did get some information good information from the Hanford Advisory Board website a while back, but it hasn't been updated since June. And unfortunately, that seems to be the status of most of our websites, that we don't get around time to update them, but we're trying. We ought to be linking our websites so that if somebody finds one of us, they'll find all of us. That's really important, and most of the websites do not have links. Ours does. Our website, by the way, is www.hanfordwatch.org. Very simple. I have a sort of a half-formed idea that I've been thinking about the last 2 days. I find the Department of Energy just absolutely impossible to talk to. I mean, this has been going on for years, and I saw it very much yesterday with Dr. Moniz and John Wagner. We threw questions at them, and what we got back was a long, rambling speech that didn't answer the question and was just supposed to soothe us and, I guess, shut us up. And that's just intolerable. I mean, I can't see the point anymore in talking to the Department of Energy. And I think somehow we need to get another party in government that has some power to come out here and hold meetings and listen to our point of view. And I don't know what that would be, but I think we ought to look in that direction. Thank you.
Unfortunately, what does the time sign mean?
But this is it.
Can I make closing comments? I want to make one comment.
Wait a minute. As the facilitator, I'm confused at the mixed signals I'm getting.
Go for another 5 minutes, and then we need to be out of here because they need the room back.
Okay, so we have to be out of this room at 4. Okay.
I need 5 minutes.
And you need 5 minutes. And I have 10 minutes till 4.
And if you'll take us a while to pack out.
Okay.
We're supposed to be a little more.
Okay.
Go ahead.
if this is on, Douglas.
It's on.
No, the mic is not on. But I don't need to have it on.
It's hers. Here, this
Okay.
one.
Video camera. Here's what I want to do. And once again, I got to be the one who does the challenge. But let me tell you this. This is from myself. Giving of yourself for the future here, to be effective, I believe you have to give until it literally hurts. If you got $1 million and you give $10, you're not really sacrificing. And what I say and challenge to you all, and you can hold me to it, if you don't give until it hurts, it's not going to be enough. And that point I want to make and hold me accountable to that. And I hope that you all will take that, because we got to give until it hurts to make an actual movement work.
Okay, I haven't seen a paper passing around for people's signatures for the resolution. Did anyone do that? Okay, go ahead.
My name is Deborah Seiler, and I unknowingly was raised and moved time and time again into low-dose radiation zones. I come from a family who's everyone's sick with thyroid disease and cancers early in life, things like this. And I'm apparently allergic to these. And so I'll also turn around, and if anybody here is connected with health information networks and data studies that are national that show low-dose drifts and things like that, I would really like you to come find me, because I'm having trouble finding the information. And also to say thanks to the people that put this on, as well as to the whistleblowers and outspoken people like Casey. I've been an outspoken person, and I know the pressure that you're under, and I want to tell you that, you know, you're like a national hero at this point, because if people on the inside don't stand up and say what's going on, the truth will never be known. And so I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, rapidly, there's two people.
And I don't even like to do this. My name's Maxine Hines, and I've been coming to meetings.
A little bit closer.
Oh, all right. Okay, can you hear now? Anyway, I've been coming to meetings for 15 years. I'm from LeGrand and started over there, and I've listened to USDOE live for many, many years. They're inept. It's obvious. And I wanted also to say thanks to Casey and your family, because you've probably all put up with a lot of hell. I would like to see more outreach done to young people, because as I sit and listen, there's nobody here that needs convincing that there's a big problem. But you talk about the kids in high school and the young adults in the Tri-Cities area who have bought all the propaganda. Somehow we need to reach them. I don't know if anybody's working on this. Can we get something into school curriculums for Washington, Oregon? You know, geography, geology, history, whatever it takes, science, health. There's problems. How do we impact these kids? They're going to be voting in a few years. They're going to make a difference. So if anybody's working on that, here's some energy.
Okay.
I would make a comment to that, and that is that look on the internet under Giraffe Project, which is a nonprofit organization designed to bring character education into the schools, and you can choose any of the causes of which you believe are really important as examples for them to have projects on. And it's all the whole set curriculum, everything's on the web. Look it up, take your time. There's people just giving of that information, and I say look for the Giraffe Project in the internet, and you will find an incredible answer to your question.
While Lloyd's coming up, there's also the state of Oregon created it's called Nuclear Age curriculum. In 1984, we passed a bill in the legislature, and there was actual curriculum that's been approved by the Department of Education, is available for use in K through 12 schools in Oregon. So you could look that up as well. Oregon Peaceworks would be a resource for that, because they were the key organizers. Lloyd,
Thanks.
Quickly.
I think we owe a lot to the Government Accountability Project for putting on this. But I must say that coming to this is like being on the Trail of Tears. for the last couple of days, all I've heard is, DOE won't do this, DOE won't do that, where do we go, where do we go? And frankly, I think that it's not searching out somebody in power to listen to us. I think it's us putting ourselves in power to do something about this. And frankly, I'm not interested in waiting around any longer to see if the Department of Energy is going to do something right. I think we all know the answer to that, and I think we ought to demand accountability now. And I think we ought to create that accountability. I think we ought to sit down and shoot for the stars, because anything that'll come out of that, even if it's something less, is going to be greater than what we're going to get for settling for less. And so I really invite people to think this thing through as far as that concept of putting together a new body to be responsible for something that was created by the very entity that controls it. Talking about the fox in the chicken coop. Folks, geez, after 2 days, don't you see the light on the wall?
Again, I encourage you to look on the table for the blue report that has its criteria for what a credible cleanup program should look like. It's been put together by all of the groups within the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. So I get to close and then pass it on to Tom. And I brought my own quote too. One of the things that I'm worried about is burnout. And though a lot of us care very deeply about this work, and we work 50, 60 hours a week, you're going to burn out doing it. And we really need to keep us all around for the long haul. We have incredible amounts of information, and we need to keep ourselves healthy, both spiritually and physically, to be able to do this work and really to train the people to come behind us to carry on when we take a turn sitting. So this is a quote from Edward Abbey. "Do not burn yourselves out. Be as I am, a reluctant enthusiast, a part-time crusader, a half-hearted fanatic. Save the other half of yourselves and your lives for pleasure and adventure. It is not enough to fight for the West. It is even more important to enjoy it while you can, while it's still here. So get out there and hunt and fish and mess around with your friends, ramble the forest, encounter the grizz, climb the mountains, breathe deep of that yet sweet and lucid air. Sit quietly for a while and contemplate the precious stillness, the lovely, mysterious, and awesome space. Enjoy yourselves. Keep your brain in your head and your head firmly attached to your body, the body active, and I promise you this much. I promise you this one sweet victory over your enemies. Those desk-bound men with their hearts in a safe deposit box and their eyes hypnotized by desk calculators. I promise you this. You will outlive the bastards." Yeah.
Thanks to the staff at Kinko's. They've kindly provided me with this resolution to read. This is the resolution on the Hanford Medical Monitoring Program. I just wanted to read, and if you want to sign on to that, we've got a pad of paper. We at least get your names and numbers on that. The failure of Congress to provide immediate and full funding for the Hanford Medical Monitoring Program is an injustice to those exposed to Hanford emissions and a violation of the purpose and process of the health remedies incorporated in the federal Superfund law. We hereby resolve that Congress fully fund the program and ensure it serves the people and purposes outlined by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. Short and sweet.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's been a really good conference. It's been a lot of work and a lot of time. And one of the reasons that we decided to kind of take this conference on about 8 months ago was to help reach out and form a new energy to do exactly what's been suggested here, which is try to find an alternative to the management at the Hanford site. We had a meeting with Dr. Moniz after the conference yesterday, and in that meeting were several whistleblowers and myself and Lynn Schrader. And you know, it was another meeting with another DOE bureaucrat as far as we were concerned. This one no more responsive than some of the others. Actually, some others have been more responsive than this one. And we tried to explain that, look, many years ago, these whistleblowers who had vision, who had courage, who had tenacity, who had smarts, tackled this problem, and through the courage of one energy secretary, Hazel O'Leary, were given a chance, a small chance, to prove that they were right at the Hanford site. Now, the project that was being worked by Casey Ruud and John Broder was to show that the models about tank waste leaking into the groundwater, and those models said that they didn't, they were self-serving models, of course, were wrong. And that if only you could get a little bit of real data, then you would show this. And they actually didn't set out to prove that. They said, we're going to look at the data and see what the data says. And Casey managing the program, and John Broder doing the technical work on it, and both these people lost their jobs many times during the Hanford project and were pushed around quite a bit, actually did manage to come up with some data and were able to show that the models were incorrect, and it turned Hanford exactly upside down on its head. And Hanford management basically has spun around in circles ever since, and this was about in 1996, trying to decide what to do with this information, spending literally millions and millions of dollars holding meetings full of bureaucrats to, figure out what to do about this. In the meantime, Casey was shoved out, John Broder was set aside, and here you have Dr. Moniz telling us we're going to bring in, these universities and these experts, and we're working on our people to, get them to agree. And it isn't, you had success, excuse me, DOE, you had success for one of the very first times at your project with Casey Ruud. And you had success with John Broder. And why aren't you repeating that success? Well, because they sinned. They told the truth. They revealed a basic truth that was very inconvenient, which is no more than as what my esteemed colleague before me so eloquently described, gravity sucks. And it sucked that waste right down to the groundwater and right down into the river, and now we've got an additional problem to deal with. Well, it's no surprise, but whistleblowers are the leaders. Whistleblowers at Hanford brought plutonium production to a standstill at the Hanford site. It was Casey Ruud and his audits in 1986 and his testimony before Congress, the day before he testified about the egregious environmental problems and safety issues at Hanford that led to, well, one day before his testimony, they shut down Purex, and it never reopened. It was the end of plutonium production. Now, the Cold War ended, but basically it was unmasked. The whole system was beginning to be unmasked at that point. Whistleblowers warned us about the hydrogen gas buildup in the tanks. Yeah, hydrogen gas building up in these tanks, making each one of these tanks essentially powder kegs, what Governor Locke called Chernobyl's waiting to happen, and it's not an understatement. Whistleblowers told us about the ferrocyanide in the tanks, an inconvenient explosive chemical that when it gets a little too heated up, becomes unstable and takes off. And now I'm talking about a whistleblower named Sonia Anderson, who told us about red oils in hydrogen gas and other organic materials building up in the Hanford tanks, representing a huge explosive problem for the Northwest. And as scientists say, could lead to rapid deflagration and an uncontrolled reaction. Hanford whistleblowers exposed the cover-up of the tank waste migration program at Hanford, as I've already talked about. And two whistleblowers had the idea for this conference and actually paid for this conference, Lynn Collard and Jerry Davis, who were engineers and geophysicists, and I hope they're in this room somewhere. Please stand up. Not only did they pay for it, whistleblowers were also very important and very central in the planning of this conference and the agenda setting of this conference. At the same time, it's important to know that Hanford whistleblowers, as many others, have sacrificed their careers, in some cases their health, in many cases their families, their free time, to save humanity from itself, our own follies. People like Gay Oglesby, who blew the whistle on environmental problems at the bee plant at Hanford. She's done incredible work and had no thanks and no recognition to speak of. And she keeps doing it. I don't know why. I just don't know why, but she does. Something is driving her inside. Our organization, we're mostly attorneys and activists. And what we try to do is listen to these people and try to respond. Most of it goes over our heads. Most of it we can't really handle, but we try to filter out what we can and use it and communicate it. They are, the Hanford whistleblowers, the true heroes, and if you only knew, they would be your heroes truly as well, national heroes. They need to be thanked. I'd like them to stand up, please. Casey, John Broder, Gay, Sonia, Lynn, Jerry Davis, anyone else? Thank you. Now, also, there were a lot of other people that helped make this conference successful. Douglas Palinchis donated his sound equipment and his talent to do the sound here, saved us quite a bit of money with that donation, and his music, which was very beautiful. Thank you, Douglas. A lot of people on the Government Accountability Project staff also worked very hard over the last several months helping make this conference a success. Lynn Schrader was our moderator, and we very much appreciate the time and effort, and he's been in a great deal of pain recently, and he suffered through it and said, well, I be at home in pain, so I might as well be here in pain, but he's suffered through it, and we really appreciate his sacrifice in being here. Pamela Burton, where are you, Pam? Please stand up. She is our conference organizer. I want to mention by name Andrew Shower, Ike Binford, Angelo Loxon, Dana Gold, and Jen Cleven for all of their time and effort and helping this conference be successful. But I think it's really important to realize that there's so much more to do. And the Hanford public interest groups and the whistleblowers and the activists and people who aren't here, who would like to be here but can't, we're drawing together. We're working together closer and closer, and I think that's very, very important. And we're making connections nationally, and we're getting senators in here, and even the DOE felt that it had to walk into a hostile crowd and face the music on it. I think that's important. Now, we didn't like what they said. We don't like what they do, but the fact that they feel compelled to acknowledge us, I think, is a success. And I think we need to grow and take advantage of, I think, a growing power. 10 years ago when we started, there was nothing like this going on. The fact that we can hold conferences now and talk about agendas to take Hanford away from the Department of Energy. It's not their military toy anymore. Take it away from them. I think that is an admirable agenda, and I think it's one that can be achieved. It might take a few years, but it's really, obviously, the only alternative. If you can't change this beast, then let's take its toy away from them. So I'm very hopeful that you all will get involved in any way that you can to help us achieve these goals, not just of isolation of these wastes, but of changing the very nature of what's happening in the Northwest, this whole federal control issue, keeping us away from it. The Cold War is over, and thank God for that. Well, let's start acting like it. Thanks all for coming very much, and hope you can come to the bar that was mentioned by Robin, and if you need more directions, there are posters around here.